After I got fired, my husband threw me out with just a handbag. My meal smirked. You're Ulysses now. An hour later. Hi, welcome to her revenge. I'd like to take you through a new story today. The same night I was fired, my husband threw me out of the house with nothing but a single bag. My mother-in-law smiled and said, "Let's see how you survive without this family." I was curled up on the stone steps of an abandoned church, in the middle of a violent storm, when I met a woman with bare feet. I took off the only raincoat I had and draped it over her shoulders. 1 hour later, 7 black Cadillacs surrounded me. The woman stepped out, no longer a stranger in the cold, but a powerful billionaire. She said exactly one sentence that turned my life onto a completely different path. And the people who betrayed me began to pay the price. To everyone watching, thank you for being here. Now tell me in the comments, where in the world are you joining from? A city, a country? I want to know. Note: some elements in this story were shaped for narrative and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or locations is coincidental, but what I want you to carry away from it is not. The morning of October started the way every Friday had for 6 years. My badge beeping green at the lobby scanner, my coffee waiting at the 3rd floor cart. Until it didn't. I got in early, the way I always did when a deadline was close. The 18th floor of Harlow and Reed Design was quiet. At that hour, just the low hum of the ventilation system and the glow of my monitor cutting through the grey October light that filtered in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had been working on the Meridian Quarter redesign for 11 weeks. The presentation was due the following Thursday. I was good at this work. I had always been good at this work. And I had spent 6 years making sure the right people in that building knew it. I settled in with my coffee and pulled up the project files. The Meridian Quarter concept was the best work I had ever produced. A complete reimagining of a downtown commercial block that had been sitting half empty since 2019. New light pathways, adaptive workspace layouts, green integration on every level. I had stayed until 9 the night before, getting the renderings exactly right. At 8:45 my desk phone buzzed. "Naomi, it was Linda from the front desk. Marcus Webb would like to see you in his office. Whenever you have a moment." I knew what that meant. Everyone in any office, in any city in this country knows what that means. But I told myself I didn't. I straightened my cardigan, picked up a notepad out of pure habit, and walked down the hall. Marcus Webb was the kind of HR director who had clearly practiced his expression in the mirror. That morning, he was seated behind his desk with his hands folded, and a closed folder in front of him, a box of tissues, visible on the credenza behind his left shoulder. The kind of detail you only notice when you understand why it is there. "Naomi, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I'm going to be direct with you, because I think you deserve that." "Okay," I said, my voice came out steady. I was honestly surprised by that. Harlow and Reed is undergoing a significant restructuring. The decision came from the board level. The entire creative division is being eliminated, effective today. This is not a performance issue. Your record here has been exceptional, but your position has been eliminated, along with the rest of the department. I looked at him for a moment. The entire division. I said, every role at your level and below. Within the creative department, yes. He slid the folder across to me. Your severance package is outlined here. 6 weeks of pay. Health benefits continuation through December 31st. And a personal letter of recommendation. I drafted this morning. I picked up the folder. I did not open it. When you say effective today, we'll need your badge and equipment by end of business. He paused. I am genuinely sorry, Naomi. That is not a thing I say to everyone who sits in that chair. I stood up. I thanked him because that was what you do. Then I walked back down the hall to my desk, which felt somehow like walking through water. That only I could feel. The packing took less time than 6 years should. Everything fit into a medium cardboard box, with room to spare. The small succulent I had kept alive through 3 office relocations. My framed regional recognition award from the American Institute of Architects. which had hung above my monitor since 2021, and a photograph tucked into the corner of my monitor frame of Brandon and me, standing in front of Hallgrímskirkju Church in Reykjavik 2 years ago. We were both laughing at something that had happened a half second before the shutter clicked, and you could see it on our faces, whatever that thing was. I placed the photo in the box face down. Priya found me at the stairwell door. She worked in brand strategy on 17 and had clearly been watching for me. She caught the door with one hand and pulled me into a hug with the other. Before I could say a word, Priya was one of those people who moved through the world at a frequency slightly faster than everyone else, and she made decisions, including the decision to hold onto a person with complete certainty. I heard, she said quietly, her voice close to my ear. The whole floor heard. Within 20 minutes the whole division or I said it was a strange thing to correct, but it came out anyway. She pulled back and looked at me with the intensity she reserved for things she considered non-negotiable. Call me tonight. No matter what time, 2 in the morning, 3. I don't care, you pick up the phone and you call me. I will, I told her. And I meant it. She held the door half a beat longer. You are the best designer in this building. And everyone on the 18th floor knows it. And Marcus Webb knows it, and the only people who don't are the ones on the board who made this call. She let go of the door. Call me Naomi. I carried the box down to the second basement level and sat in my car in the parking garage without starting the engine. The space was dim and smelled like concrete, and through the exit ramp, I could see a narrow slice of the October sky, which had shifted to an unusual grey purple since I had driven in that morning. My phone showed 67% battery. I pulled up Brandon's name and pressed call. He picked up on the third ring. Hey. His voice had that particular distant quality, the one that meant he was reading something while talking. Hey, I said, something happened at work today. I'll explain everything when I see you, but I was thinking I'd come home for a bit, just to figure out next steps. Sure, Brandon said. Papers shifted in the background. Dinner's at 7. We've got people coming over. People coming. I repeated slowly. Just come home, Naomi. He said it the way you say something you've already moved past. Before the sentence is finished. We can talk later. The line went quiet before I answered. I sat for another minute with the phone in my lap and 6 years in a cardboard box on the seat beside me. Then I started the car, backed out of the space, and drove up the ramp into the cold October air. The highway curved through a long corridor of old oaks, and beyond the tree line, the western sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise. I told myself, Brandon would know what to say when I got there. He always used to. I had lived in that house for 5 years. The moment I stepped through the front door that afternoon, I felt like a guest who had arrived at the wrong address. The foyer smelled like white lilies and catered food, and the particular kind of expensive that costs a great deal to look effortless. White linen covered the dining table, extended to seat 20. Candles were lit at even intervals. 2 servers impressed. Black shirts moved through the space with the practiced ease of people who did this 3 times a week. Through the tall windows, I could see the western sky had deepened into a purple gray that had nothing to do with the hour. I set my bag on the entry console, the way I had done 1,000 times, and tried to understand what I was looking at. Naomi, Gloria Wells, came around the corner from the kitchen hallway, with her arms open, silk blouse catching the candlelight, her expression arranged from a distance into something that resembled warmth. She pressed both cheeks against mine, in the European fashion she had adopted sometime in the past decade. We didn't expect you quite this early, she said it quietly, pitched just for me. As a server passed behind her, given the day you've had, I kept my smile in place. It's good to see you, Gloria. Of course it is. She touched my arm once. Then she turned toward the far end of the room and raised her voice just enough to carry. Brandon, look who's here. Brandon was across the living room, deep in conversation with 2 men in suits I didn't recognize. He looked up and gave me the nod. You give someone you are genuinely glad to see, but cannot interrupt a conversation for He held up one finger. 1 minute. Then turned back. 5 years of marriage, one finger. I moved through the room slowly, stopping to exchange pleasantries with people I recognized from firm events. Faces I knew without names, names I knew without faces. Everyone was polished and celebratory, in the way that people become when they are gathered to honor someone with power. I reached Brandon's side, just as the two men drifted toward the bar. "Hey," I said. "Congratulations, you should have told me," I texted. He said it without looking at me, already scanning the room behind my shoulder. Before I could answer, he shifted slightly and gestured toward someone approaching. From the left. "Naomi, this is Sasha Reeves. She joined the firm 3 months ago. Corporate transactions." Sasha Reeves was in her late 20s, wearing a deep green wrap dress, selected with obvious attention. Her handshake was smooth and confident. She smiled at me with the particular, practiced warmth of someone who learned early that a good smile is a professional instrument. "Han, I've heard so much about you," she said. "Brandon mentions your work constantly." I looked at Brandon. He was already looking somewhere past both of us. "He never mentioned you," I said pleasantly. Something shifted briefly in Sasha's expression, too fast to read clearly. "Well," she said, "the firm keeps us all pretty buried." She touched Brandon's sleeve. A light, familiar thing gone before it registered as a gesture, and excused herself toward the bar. I watched her walk away. Then I watched Brandon watch her. And I understood something fully and completely, before I had the language to name what I understood. Gloria appeared at my elbow. "Come help me check on the kitchen," she said. It was not a question. The kitchen was quieter. 2 caterers worked at the island without looking up. Gloria went directly to the counter and began rearranging a platter of crostini. That needed no rearranging. "You know, I was just saying to a friend last week," she began, keeping her attention on the platter, "that the creative fields have simply become so unstable. The turnover alone." She glanced up briefly. "How many positions has this been now in 6 years?" "The entire creative division was eliminated today." I said, "Every role at my level and below, of course." She set an olive dish to the left of the platter, with deliberate precision. "I'm sure it had nothing to do with fit." She looked up and gave me the kind of smile that knows exactly what it is doing. The thing about Brandon's world is that it requires a certain steadiness at home. I mean, when a man is building something of real consequence, the people around him need to provide that foundation. She patted my hand. "The way you pat something you have decided to be patient with. I know you understand that." I excused myself before she finished the sentence. "The rest of that hour, I moved through the party, the way you move through a room you knew once in a dream. Everything the right shape but the proportions wrong." I found Brandon twice, and each time the conversation lasted under a minute, before someone pulled him toward a more useful conversation. The third time I caught him alone near the window. I put my hand on his arm. "Brandon, I need 5 minutes, not here, just 5 minutes." He looked at my hand on his arm, then at my face. "Later," he said. The word landed like something that had been decided before I asked. Outside, the first crack of thunder moved through the sky, and the tall windows shuddered in their frames. A few guests glanced up. Someone near the fireplace laughed and said something about the weather. The candlesticks on the dining table flickered and steadied themselves. Gloria stepped to the center of the room and raised her champagne flute. The party gathered around the gesture, the way rooms always gather around Gloria, as if the movement were their own idea. "Brandon," she said, "who has worked toward this longer than most of you know." She turned her gaze to her son and held it there, while the room lifted their glasses with her. Then at exactly the right moment she turned slightly, just slightly, toward where I stood near the edge of the group. Her eyes found mine over the rim of her glass, for the space of one breath. "And to resilience," she added, her voice sweet as anything. The room applauded. I lifted a glass I didn't remember picking up. Brandon set his down on the side table beside him. He took one step in my direction, and when he spoke, his voice carried that particular flat precision I had only heard from him when he was cross-examining a witness across a courtroom. I need to speak with you privately, he said. Now Brandon's home office always smelled like leather and certainty. That evening following him through the door, I understood for the first time that certainty can be sharpened into something that cuts. He closed the door without looking back at me. He did not offer a seat. I had been in this room hundreds of times, across 5 years, sometimes with coffee, when he worked past midnight, sometimes just to sit on the leather settee by the window and talk about nothing in particular, the way two people do when they have built something together and still feel safe inside it. I stood in the center of the room now and felt none of that. Brandon moved behind his desk. He opened the center drawer, removed a folder, and placed it on the surface between us. With the measured economy he used in courtrooms, nothing wasted, everything positioned exactly where it was meant to land. I need to walk you through something, he said. I looked at the folder. I did not reach for it. Okay. 18 months ago, when we restructured the Wells family holdings into a limited liability company, you signed the operating agreement. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. At the time I explained that the structure was designed for estate protection and tax efficiency. That was accurate. The agreement also contained an amendment clause on page 11(1) that transferred your membership interest to my mother's holding company upon a specified triggering condition. I heard every word. I could not immediately arrange them into something that made sense. A triggering condition, I said. The condition was met and exercised 4 months ago. He set his finger below a block of text. On the second page, the transfer was executed, notarized and filed with the state on June 14th. The LLC now holds $8.5 million in total assets. The Wells family real estate portfolio, 3 generations of accumulated property, along with the investment accounts from my father's estate that we managed jointly. All of it is now held under my mother's company. The room went quiet in a way I had never noticed before. The storm outside the party, 1 floor below the low creak of the house in the wind, all of it was still there. None of it reached me. You had me sign this, I said. You signed the operating agreement, yes. The amendment was on page 11 of a 43-page document. He said it without inflection, the way someone recites a fact that has already been decided upon. Before the conversation began I looked at him. How long ago did you plan this? Brandon adjusted the folder slightly, aligning its edge with the desk corner. The structure was drafted with this outcome in mind. From the initial filing. How long ago, Brandon? He met my eyes. The operating agreement was finalized in March of last year. March of last year. 8 months before I lost my position at Harlow. And read 14 months before tonight. Roughly 2 weeks after, we came back from a long weekend in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where on the last evening, he had reached across the dinner table and held my hand and said he was glad we had taken the time. Meaning the trip. Meaning us. Is it reversible? I said, not quite a question. Contesting the transfer would require civil litigation, fraudulent conveyance claims, contested LLC dissolution proceedings. That kind of case takes years and costs more than the assets would justify, given their composition and current valuations. He delivered this with the careful neutrality of a man who had already worked the numbers on her behalf and built her limitation into the calculation. I understood then exactly what he had constructed. He had not taken anything. He had arranged everything so that taking was not necessary. I looked up from the folder. Is this about Sasha Reeves? Something moved in his expression, not guilt, but something in the same family as guilt, and considerably more controlled. He said nothing, Brandon. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Is this about Sasha? This concerns a number of things, he said, none of which are useful to discuss tonight. The door opened. Gloria entered carrying 2 champagne flutes, moving with the composed ease of a woman who had been standing just outside the door for exactly as long as was appropriate. She handed 1 glass to Brandon with a small, unhurried smile. The second she placed on the edge of the desk, without looking at me directly. I thought this might be needed, she said to her son. then turning to me with the smooth pleasantness she deployed, the way other people used weather. You must have so many questions. That's completely natural. I did not touch the glass. Brandon set his flute down and looked at me with an expression I had never seen in 5 years of marriage, something that had already finished deciding and had nothing left to negotiate. You have 20 minutes to take what you need from upstairs. Security will be available tomorrow morning to coordinate retrieval of anything else by appointment. The word appointment settled somewhere under my sternum. After that he continued, I'll need the house key returned and the garage access code changed. I turned and looked at the open folder on the desk. In the top right corner of the amendment page, below the notary seal and the county filing stamp, the execution date was printed in clean black type. February 14th, Valentine's Day. I had made him breakfast that morning. Scrambled eggs with chives the way he preferred, coffee with 1 sugar, a card I had written out by hand the night before, because I had always believed that handwritten things meant more than printed ones. I had left it propped against his coffee mug where he would find it first thing. He had kissed my temple on his way to the door and said thank you. He had already filed the amendment 2 weeks before. I closed the folder without speaking. I placed it back at the center of the desk, where he had put it. I walked to the door and let myself out into the hallway. I made my way up the staircase, on legs that no longer felt like my own, one hand resting on the banister without gripping it, moving, the way you move through the last seconds of something, before you fully understand. It is the last. I did not know yet that someone else in that house had been watching what was being done to me, and had spent the final months of his life preparing something quietly, deliberately and entirely for this moment. I had 20 minutes. I stood in the center of the bedroom I had shared with Brandon for 5 years, and discovered that when you are given 20 minutes to take your life with you, you find out very quickly what your life actually contains. Not the furniture, not the closet full of clothes accumulated across a decade, the blazers, the good shoes, the dresses I had bought for firm events I had attended, as Brandon's wife, and not as myself, not the framed art on the walls, half of which I had chosen, or the books on the shelves that were mine, by origin even if he had read some of them too, not the framed prints from our first apartment, that we had moved here, because throwing them away felt like admitting something. None of it. I opened the weekend bag on the bench at the foot of the bed, the one that had always been mine, the one Brandon had no particular claim on, because he had his own, and I packed with the focused calm of someone who has passed through shock into something colder and considerably more useful. 2 changes of laptop and charger, the leather roll of drafting pencils I had carried since graduate school, my mother's watch from the top of the dresser, not expensive by the standards of anything in this house, but the only object in it that had ever actually belonged to me, in a way that predated all of this, and my personal wallet, $216 in cash and the debit card, linked to the solo account I had opened 9 years ago. Before I knew Brandon's name, he had frozen the joint accounts. I knew this without checking, the same way I had understood other things tonight, before I had words for them. But this card was mine alone. He had not reached it. I zipped the bag. I stood for a moment longer than I needed to. Long enough to look at the framed photo of the two of us, from a weekend in New Hampshire, 3 years ago, both of us slightly sunburned, laughing at something the innkeeper had said. I left it on the wall. Some things you leave behind, not because they stop meaning something, but because taking them would cost more than leaving them. I walked out the staircase open to the lower landing, and from there, I could see into the foyer and the corridor beyond it, where the last of the catering staff still moved, between the kitchen and the dining room. I heard Gloria before I saw her, not her words, but the particular brightness of her voice, the way it pitched itself for an audience, rather than a room. She was standing at the base of the stairs, with her phone extended, the screen facing outward, a small red dot live in the corner. And here she comes. Gloria said, her voice warm with the practiced intimacy she reserved for people she had decided were her audience. Bless her heart. She always did know how to make an entrance. Or an exit, I suppose. I kept walking down at the same pace I had started with. 5 years in this house. Gloria continued, angling the phone slightly to keep me in frame. And she's leaving with one bag. One bag, y'all. You cannot write this. She tilted her head with a performance of sympathy. So convincing. It might have fooled someone who had not just spent 20 minutes in a room with her. I do hope she lands on her feet. I really do. 2 of the catering staff near the kitchen doorway had gone completely still. A third had turned slightly away, the way people do when they are witnessing something they cannot stop and have decided not to see. I reached the bottom of the staircase and crossed the foyer, and then I stopped. I turned and looked at Gloria directly, not at the phone, not at the red dot, just at her face above the screen. She kept the camera up. Her expression stayed bright and open, waiting to see what I would give her. I hope this is everything you planned for, I said quietly, completely level. Both of you. She blinked once, just once. I turned and walked to the front door. Brandon was already there. He opened it himself without being asked. I registered that detail. The way you register small things when larger ones have stopped landing with any weight. The storm came in immediately. Cold air, hard rain, the smell of wet pavement, and something electric in the atmosphere. That meant the worst of it had not yet arrived. I stepped through the doorway with my bag. Naomi. Brandon said it once from behind me. His voice had lost the courtroom quality. What replaced it was something I had no name for, and did not stop to find one. I did not turn around. Behind me the door closed. Not slammed. Something quieter than that and more complete. The soft, unhurried click of a well-made door settling into its frame. The sound of something engineered to last. A beat later, the alarm system chirped, twice as it armed itself for the evening. And that was the end of it. I stood on the marble front steps, in the full force of Storm Lara. The rain was coming down, in the way that serious storms come down. Not in drops, but in pressure, hitting the steps and bouncing back up, running off the porch roof in unbroken streams, turning the driveway into something that reflected the house lights back at me, in long wavering columns. My umbrella was hanging on its hook in the entry closet, 3 feet behind a door I was not going to open again tonight. I looked at that door for exactly 1 breath. Then I stepped off the porch and walked down the driveway toward the street. It was not a heroic decision. There was no swell of feeling behind it, no moment of crystalline resolve. I simply understood all at once, and without any ceremony, that I was not going to knock, was not going to call his name from the rain, was not going to stand on a porch and wait to see if I could be reconsidered. I was going to walk, because standing still in front of that door was the one thing I could imagine that would feel worse than everything that had already happened. I reached the sidewalk. Brandon's car sat in the driveway. There was no other vehicle. The insurance paperwork he had handed me 2 months ago at the kitchen counter, which I had signed while the coffee was still brewing, because I trusted the man who put it in front of me, had quietly removed my name from the policy. I understood now, standing in the rain with a bag over one shoulder, that this had not been carelessness on his part. Nothing about tonight had been careless. I had my debit card and approximately $200 in cash. I had my drafting pencils and my mother's watch. And no plan past the next 20 minutes. Storm Lara was only getting worse. And I walked directly into it anyway. I have walked through storms before, missed deadlines, quiet disappointments, the slow accumulation of things a marriage gets wrong, over years, until the weight of them stops feeling like weight at all, but I had never walked through one, while carrying everything I had left in a single bag, with nowhere specific to walk toward. Storm Lara was not interested in being walked through. It drove the rain in near horizontal sheets, turned every curb into a moving stream, and reduced the streetlights to blurred suggestions of themselves. I kept my head down and my bag pressed against my side, and moved through the Western Heights streets, toward the main road. Because moving forward was the only thing that felt better than standing still. The neighborhood looked different in a storm. The houses were the same wide lots, painted driveways, careful plantings along every fence line. But from the outside in the rain and the dark, all you could see were the lit windows, warm amber interiors, a family around a table in the house on Caldwell Street, a television flickering behind a glass door. 3 houses down. The ordinary unremarkable shape of a Friday evening, continuing entirely without me. I passed the corner, where Brandon and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. In the first year we lived there, before Sunday mornings became something we each spent separately without discussing it. I passed the park with the stone bench, where nothing particular had happened, which somehow made it harder to walk past than any of the rest. I kept walking. The rain did not adjust for any of this. By the time I hit the main road, my jacket had given up entirely. The bag had gained what felt like 10 pounds of water. My phone was still in my jacket's inner pocket, still dry. I checked the battery without stopping. 11%. I scrolled to Chloe Marsh and pressed call. She answered on the second ring, and her voice came in fast and warm and wide open, the way it always did, when she had already been waiting for something to happen. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Brandon texted me something. "Where are you right now?" "Walking," I said. "Toward the church district, I think." "Walking, Naomi, it's basically a hurricane out there. You cannot be walking. It's a storm." "I'm fine." I was not fine. But saying otherwise would not have changed the weather. He asked me to leave. A silence brief, but shaped in a way I would not think about until much later. "Okay," Chloe said, and her voice shifted into its problem-solving register. Efficient, forward-moving. The voice she used when she had already decided what needed to happen next. "Okay, can you get somewhere dry and wait? A coffee shop, a lobby, anything. I'm going to figure something out on my end. I'll find somewhere." I said, "Don't make a trip. I'm already worried." "Stop saying don't worry." Another pause, and then what exactly happened? Did he give a reason? Did he say anything about? She stopped. Started again from a slightly different direction. "Have you called anyone? Any organization, support lines, anything like that? I'm just trying to get a picture of what your options look like right now." Something registered. Not clearly, more like the particular feeling of a word you almost recognize, but can't quite place. The pivot had been quick. From "where are you" to "what are your options?" in the span of a few sentences. And the question about organizations asked before. She had asked where I was sleeping tonight. But I was soaked through and running on 11% battery. And Chloe Marsh had been my closest friend for 8 years. And so I set the feeling aside, the way you set things aside when you don't have the capacity to hold them properly. "Yet, not yet," I said. "I just left 20 minutes ago, right?" Of course you haven't." "Okay, stay on with me. Let's figure out where the nearest." The call cut. The storm took the signal the way storms take things. Without warning, without negotiation. I stood in the rain for a moment, with the ended call on my screen, then kept walking. The old Harbor Church was 3 blocks east of the main road, set back from the sidewalk behind a low stone wall, and 2 old elms that had been shedding branches in the wind. The church had been deconsecrated and sold to a preservation trust 15 years prior, and served no particular function anymore, beyond existing, which on a night like this was more than enough. The entrance overhang was cut from the same grey stone as the building, wide and deep, and dry underneath. One of the 2 street lamps on the block still worked. I ducked under the overhang and dropped my bag on the dry stone, and stood for a moment, just breathing air that wasn't moving. Then I sat down on the step and let myself cry. Not the way anyone would picture it. No heaving shoulders, no cinematic collapse. The deep quiet, entirely private kind, that does not perform itself for anyone. I cried for the girl who had married Brandon Wells at 28 because she believed she was choosing something permanent. For 6 years at Harlow and Reed, and the Meridian Quarter presentation that would now be delivered by someone else. For the small apartment Brandon and I had shared before. The house where the kitchen had been too narrow. to fit two people comfortably. And we had not cared for the version of my life I had been completely certain, until approximately 4 hours ago, that I was in the process of building. The rain intensified against the overhang. I wrapped both arms around myself and stayed there. After some time, I genuinely could not have estimated how long. I looked up, carved into the face of the stone lintel, above the overhang, in letters worn smooth by 150 years of weather, was an inscription I had to look at for a full moment, before the shapes resolved into words. All who are weary come. I stared at it. Then I laughed out loud. Alone in the dark and the amber light. Sitting on a stone step in a storm. With a wet bag and 11% battery. And $200 between me and the open sky. I laughed. Because there was simply nothing else left to do with it. Because the carving had said exactly the right thing. At the exact wrong moment. And because the alternative to laughing was continuing to cry. And I had done enough of that for one evening. The laugh faded. The rain kept going. I pulled my knees to my chest and watched the empty street. That was when I heard it. The slow, deliberate scrape of bare feet on wet stone. Coming from somewhere out, beyond the reach of the amber light. I turned and what I saw made me forget, in one completely suspended moment, that I was the one who needed help tonight. She came out of the dark the way grief always does. Slowly and then all at once. I heard the footsteps before I placed them. A slow, deliberate drag across wet stone. The kind of sound that does not belong to someone in a hurry or in shoes. I turned toward the far edge of the overhang, where the amber street lamp did not reach. And she came out of that darkness. The way things emerge, when they have been patient enough. Gradually and then entirely. There she was, old. That was the first thing. Old. In a way that made you think of weather and endurance. Of things that become more completely themselves, the longer they last. Her silver hair was plastered flat against her face and neck. By the rain she wore a thin cardigan over a dark dress, both soaked through, and doing nothing useful against the temperature. Her feet were bare on the wet stone, and the skin across her toes and the tops of her feet had gone a particular shade of purple-white. That I recognized before I could articulate why. She stopped several feet from me. She did not move closer. She looked at me with pale, entirely alert eyes. And when she spoke her voice was low and precise. And ruffled at the edges by the cold. Excuse me, she said it the way people say things they have already thought carefully about. Do you happen to know if any of the shelters in this area still have space tonight? I've been walking for some time. I looked at her feet again. The discoloration had reached past the toes, into the arch. I had taken a wilderness first aid course 7 years ago. My old firm had offered it as a team-building exercise, which had seemed absurd at the time, and I remembered enough from that afternoon to know what that particular shade meant. When it reached the feet, it meant the cold had been working long enough to matter. I don't know, I said. I'm sorry, I don't have anywhere to go tonight either. She held my gaze for a moment with those careful, unsurprised eyes. Then she moved to the far end of the stone step and sat down, leaving the full length of it between us. She folded her hands in her lap and looked out at the rain with the composure of someone who had decided, at some earlier point in the evening, to spend what was available to her on stillness rather than panic. The silence that settled between us was not uncomfortable. It was the kind that forms between two people who have each been carrying something heavy long enough that silence requires less than words. After a while she said, "What happened to you tonight, if you don't mind?" Not curious, in the way people are when they want to do something, with the answer, "Just open." The way a door left ajar is open, offering a way through, without requiring you to take it. I looked at the rain falling on the empty street. And then, because I was cold and wrung out, and because she had asked, without wanting anything in return, I told her the shape of it. Not the names, not the legal particulars, not the LLC amendment, or the date on the filing, or the precise figure of what had been transferred, to whose account. Just the shape. The job in the morning, the house in the evening, the door at 8 o'clock and the walk after. She listened without moving. She did not offer advice. She did not say I'm sorry, or at least you have your health, or everything happens for a reason, which were the three things I had been most afraid someone would say. She simply listened, with the full and unhurried weight of her attention, on every word, the way very few people in my life had ever actually listened to anything I said. When I stopped talking, she was quiet for a moment. The door closing, she said, was that the worst part. I thought about it honestly. The way you can only think about things when you have stopped pretending to be fine. No, I said. The worst part was that I wasn't surprised. When it happened, I wasn't surprised. She nodded once slowly, as if I had said something she understood, without needing it explained. I looked at her feet again. The color had not changed. She had been sitting still, and the stone beneath her was cold, and nothing about the situation was improving. On its own, I stood up. I unzipped my rain jacket, soaked through on the outside, but still holding the warmth of my body in its lining, and crossed the stone and draped it over her shoulders, without asking whether she wanted it, because asking would have given her the opportunity to say no. And I had already decided. She went completely still. Her hands came up slowly, and gripped the fabric at the front, holding it closed. The way you hold something you have been told you are not allowed to have. Then she turned and looked up at me from the step. What is your name? She said. Naomi. She said it quietly once, as if she was setting it down somewhere. She would know how to find it. Then she looked at me with those pale eyes, for a long moment, before she spoke again. I have spent a great many years moving through this world, she said, and I have met a great many people. There are people who have everything and give nothing. And there are people who have nothing left, and still find a way to give. She paused, not searching for words but choosing them. The second kind are the rarest thing I know. I want you to remember that about yourself. She stood, she rose, with a steadiness that had not been present when she sat down, as if the warmth had reached something deeper than temperature. She held my gaze for one more moment, something in her expression that I could not entirely read. Something between recognition and resolution. And then she turned and walked back out into the rain. She was gone before I thought to ask her name. I sat back down on the stone. The absence of the jacket was immediate and absolute. I pulled my knees to my chest, and folded both arms across myself, and looked at the empty, rain-lit street where she had been standing. A moment before, I had given the last warm thing I owned to a woman I would never see again. I had done it without hesitation, without calculation, the way you do the things that turn out to matter most. And the hollow space in my chest, the one that had been there since 8 o'clock tonight, since the alarm chirping twice, and the long walk through Western Heights, felt for the first time since any of it began, like something other than empty. Not full, just different, changed in a way I did not have language for yet. I closed my eyes. And then somewhere below, the sound of the storm below, rain on stone and wind in the elm trees, and the low sustained note of thunder moving east. I heard something I could not place, something that had not been there a moment ago, something that did not belong to any storm I had ever been in. I heard them before I saw them, a low synchronized hum that rose through the rain, with the authority of something that had no intention of being ignored. I opened my eyes. The sound was coming from the north end of the block, growing not louder but more present, the way a sound becomes when whatever is making it moves deliberately, and is not concerned about being heard. I stood up from the step without deciding to. Some things the body does before the mind catches up. They came around the corner in formation. 7 black Cadillac Escalades, moving at the pace of a procession, headlights cutting through the rain in long, steady beams. They filled the narrow block, and moved in near-perfect alignment, each vehicle maintaining the same interval from the one ahead. They stopped without any visible signal, all 7 in the same moment, the way a single organism stops, rather than a column of separate machines. The engines went quiet. The rain fell on 7 identical roof lines, and ran off in channels, and the block was suddenly more still than it had been all evening. Then the center door opened. A woman stepped out. Anne. I did not immediately understand what I was looking at. She was wearing a camel hair coat that reached to mid-calf, structured at the shoulder and belted at the waist. Her silver hair was gathered into a low, clean bun at the nape of her neck. At her left wrist, catching the amber light from the surviving street lamp, something glinted with the quiet brilliance of diamonds that have never needed to prove anything. She crossed the wet pavement with the unhurried certainty of someone who has not been uncertain about where she is going for a very long time. 2 paces behind her, a woman I had not seen emerge from the vehicle moved in close formation, early 50s, silver hair cropped short, holding an umbrella over both of them, with the precision of someone whose professional competence had long since ceased to require demonstration. I would learn her name was Patricia Dunn. She would become in time one of the most important people in my life, but at that moment, she was simply a presence behind Eleanor, efficient and entirely still. From between the parked vehicles, 4 figures in dark civilian clothing appeared and fanned out along the sidewalk in both directions. Without exchanging a single word, the woman in the camel coat walked directly to where I was standing, at the edge of the church overhang, and stopped 3 feet away. I looked at her face. I knew this face. I had looked at this face 45 minutes ago. On the same stone step above, a soaked cardigan, belonging to a woman with bare feet, turning purple at the toes. And I could not make those 2 images fit into a single coherent thing. I said nothing. There was nothing available. My name is Eleanor Voss, she said. Her voice carried the particular clarity of someone accustomed to rooms that go quiet when she speaks. I am the founder of the Voss Family Foundation. We hold an endowment of $6 billion and deploy approximately $180 million annually across housing, health access, and economic mobility programs across the country. She said it the way someone reads coordinates. Accurate, verifiable, free of performance. I gave you my raincoat. I said it was the only sentence I could locate. You did. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but related to one. I would like to explain how I come to be standing in front of you right now, if you'll allow me. I nodded, because nodding was less than words, and words were not available. She described the practice not as an explanation of herself, but of what she had been doing for 22 years. On the night of the season's worst storm, she left the estate without a phone, without identification, without anything connecting her to the name Eleanor Voss. She walked until she found what she was looking for, or the weather made it impossible to continue. What I look for, she said, is someone who still has it. Whatever remains in a person, after everything has been taken from them, that still turns outward rather than inward. Whatever makes someone give their last thing away, rather than hold it. Then she paused and addressed the thing I would eventually think to ask about. My security team accompanies me on these nights, at a distance in plain clothes for my safety. Tonight they were positioned 2 blocks north of here. When I stopped at this overhang, they observed from the corner of this block. She held my gaze steadily. They saw you arrive alone. They saw you sitting on the step. And they saw the coat. That is the full extent of what they witnessed. I want to be clear about that because it matters. Patricia made a small adjustment to the umbrella angle. Rain continued to fall on the street behind them. I have been doing this for 22 years. Eleanor continued. Most years I walk until the storm ends and return home before sunrise with nothing. The years I come home empty-handed outnumber the years I do not, by a considerable margin. She let that settle for a moment. Tonight I found you. The 7 vehicles idled behind her in total silence. On the empty block, water moved along the gutter in a thin, continuous stream. Will you come and speak with me further, she said. There is somewhere dry. And I have a number of things I would like to say that are easier said sitting down. I looked at her for a long moment, and then I asked the only question I had left: why? Eleanor looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, but recognized as serious, in the way that only certain things are serious, because I have spent 22 years looking for someone who gives their last thing away, without glancing around to see if anyone is watching. Because the capacity to do that, in the condition you were in tonight, tells me everything I need to know about who a person actually is. She held my gaze without moving. And because 46 years ago, I was sitting on a step not entirely unlike that one, and someone changed the direction of my life, I have been trying to earn that ever since. The car door closed behind me, with a sound engineered for permanence. Soft, complete, nothing wasted. The convoy moved forward through Storm Lara, without haste, without sound, beyond rain on the roof, and wheels through standing water. I pressed my palm flat against the cold window glass, and watched Fairhaven blur and amber in the dark. Beyond the rain, whatever came next, I already understood, was unlike anything I had been prepared for. I did not know yet how exactly right I was. The estate materialized through the rain, the way things appear in the clearest kind of dream. First a gate, then a long driveway through trees, whose trunks were older than the city itself, and then lights that seemed too warm and too steady to belong to the same night I had just been standing in. The gate was iron, set into a stone wall that disappeared into old hedgerow. On both sides, the driveway curved for nearly a quarter mile, through old growth trees that sheltered us from the worst of Storm Lara. And then the house appeared Tudor style. The stone facade darkened with decades of weather. Wisteria dormant on the front wall. A porch light, burning above. A door that was already open when we arrived. Large in the way certain things are large. Not as a statement, but simply as a consequence of having been built in a different era, by people with different expectations. The interior smelled like cedar and cut roses, and the particular warmth of rooms that have been heated, for a long time, by something other than forced air. A stone fireplace in the main hall had a real fire going, the kind that crackles in an irregular, unproduced way that distinguishes it from the gas versions in houses like the one I had left 5 hours ago. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the far wall looked out over a private lake that was invisible in the dark, but audible in the way water is when rain falls. Across a large open surface, a man Eleanor called Thomas appeared briefly to take my wet bag, and disappeared. He moved with the complete quiet of someone whose professional purpose was to be minimally present. Practical clothes had been set out in a guest room. I was briefly shown not my size exactly, but close and chosen for warmth rather than effect. Patricia, I would learn, made these assessments quickly and accurately, as a matter of professional habit. This was apparently a standard protocol. Eleanor had over the years occasionally brought people back to the estate after the annual walk. I was not the first. I was, she would tell me later, one of very few. When I returned to the main sitting room, Eleanor was already in her chair. 2 cups of tea sat on the low table between us. Neither of us touched them. "I'll tell you about the foundation," she said, "and then I'll make you an offer. After that, ask whatever you need to ask." She described the foundation with the same efficient directness she seemed to bring to everything. The facts arranged in sequence, nothing added for effect. The endowment was $6 billion, built over 40 years through reinvestment, following her late husband's commercial real estate enterprise. The foundation deployed approximately $180 million annually across 3 program areas: housing stability, health access, and economic mobility. The real estate holdings, over 500 million square feet of commercial property, across 14 states, generated the operating revenue that kept the endowment working and intact. The foundation has been operating for 31 years, she said. For 31 years I have been its primary decision maker. I am 75, I have no children and no natural heir. What I have is a board of 12 people who respect the institution and will, the moment I am no longer present to hold a direction, make decisions by committee that will reduce everything I have built to something unrecognizable within a decade. I looked at her across the untouched tea. "And you want to prevent that?" "I want to find someone who understands what it is for," she said, "before I go. Someone who has experienced from the inside what it means to need what we provide." The offer was straightforward in structure, though nothing about it was modest. a room in the east wing of the estate, which she owned outright, a living stipend to cover reasonable expenses, a 5-year program of direct apprenticeship, board meetings, field visits, financial oversight, governance, every dimension of running an institution of this size and complexity. At the end of it, if Naomi proved to be who Eleanor believed she was, foundation leadership would be hers. What if I'm not who you think I am? I said. Then we will both have learned something useful, she said with a tone that suggested she was not concerned about this outcome. Why not someone who's already in this field, with graduate credentials, an established record, years of experience? I have met a considerable number of people with all of those things. Eleanor said. What I have not found until tonight is someone who gives their last warm thing away in the middle of the worst night of their life, without checking to see if anyone is watching. I was quiet for a moment. All right, I said. Something in Eleanor's expression shifted, not surprise but something adjacent to relief, as if she had been holding a particular question for a long time, and had only just been given permission to set it down. One more matter, she said before either of us moved. What was done to your assets tonight? The transfer your husband described may not be as permanent as he wants you to believe. Tomorrow morning, I'll connect you with outside litigation counsel, not foundation lawyers, people I trust for complex personal cases. This is your matter, not the foundation's. But you shouldn't face it without proper representation. She paused. They will advise you to file for divorce immediately to protect your legal standing, while the asset recovery process moves forward. I think you should take that advice. I thought of the LLC amendment, and the date in the upper right corner. February 14th. Yes, I said, I think so too. Patricia appeared in the doorway, precisely as she always seemed to, at exactly the right moment. I'll show you your room. The east wing sat at the end of a long corridor. Patricia opened the door and stood aside. The room was larger than any apartment I had lived in. French doors on the far wall opened onto a garden, dormant in October, but fragrant, in the way that rose gardens stay fragrant, even after the season has gone. Something in the soil itself that holds what summer left behind. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at those doors, and the dark garden beyond them. This was the first night in 5 years I would sleep somewhere that Brandon's presence did not fill. Not his habits, not the particular texture of living alongside someone, just the first night in 5 years that the room around me would belong entirely to no one but me. I sat with that for a long time without moving. On the nightstand was a leather binder with a paper tab labeled with my name. I opened it to the first page. For words in Eleanor's precise "Welcome to your life." I did not sleep for a long time, but for the first time since 8 o'clock that evening, since the door and the alarm and the long walk into the storm, I did not feel like I was falling. Patricia Dunn knocked on my door at 4:45 on the first morning, not 5:45. I would later learn she considered this generous. The lake run began at 5 with a man named Cole, who had spent 12 years in naval special warfare, and now trained 3 people in the world, Eleanor being one of them. Cole did not speak during the run unless I fell behind, at which point he said only to keep it. By the end of the first week I was keeping it. By the end of the third, I had stopped dreading the alarm. Working breakfast at 7:30 meant reading 990 power factors tax returns over oatmeal I did not taste. The 99 OPF is the annual financial disclosure required of every private foundation by the IRS. It contains the full anatomy of an organization, where the money originates, where it goes, how leadership is compensated, what the endowment earned and what it lost. Eleanor believed that if you could not read one in under 40 minutes and tell her what it meant, you were not ready to make decisions about one. I could read them in 35 by the end of October. Board meetings ran 9 to 6, 5 days a week in the Meridian Building's 24th floor conference room, overlooking downtown Fairhaven. On the first morning I arrived, expecting to take a seat along the wall and observe, Patricia met me at the door and placed a laser pointer in my hand. The South Quarter grants summary, she said. Page 14. You have the first 12 minutes. I looked at her. I haven't been briefed on this application. Page 14. She said and opened the conference room door. 12 people around the table. Average age somewhere in the early 60s. All of them with decades of institutional experience. All of them watching me with the particular, patient skepticism of people who have witnessed this experiment before and have not yet been given a reason to invest in it. I found page 14. I took one breath. I presented the summary. It was not good, but I got through it without stopping, which Eleanor told me afterward was the only thing she had required of day one. Field visits happened 2 and 3 times a week. East Fairhaven was a different city from the one I had spent 5 years in, 30 minutes by car from Western Heights, but separated from it by something more fundamental than distance. In the 3rd week of October, I sat across from a woman named Donna at a family shelter on Clement Street. 3 children under 7, 1 small room, 11 months in temporary placement, a wait list for transitional housing running 14 months out. She talked about it with the flat practicality of someone who has learned to ration her outrage very carefully. The kids started asking when we're going home. Around month 4. She said. I stopped knowing how to answer them by month 6. I wrote down what she said. I asked the questions I was trained to ask. And something about that conversation. The way she looked at the wall when she said month 6. The way the phrase settled in the room, without anyone marking it, did something to my understanding of what the foundation actually was. That did not undo itself. Afterward, 3 evenings each week, I drove to the local university's satellite campus for the executive, non-profit leadership program, graduate level certificate, coursework in foundation governance, organizational management and grant strategy. I was the youngest person in the room, by roughly a decade, and the only one who had not arrived from an established organization. Most participants were already executive directors, development officers, or senior program staff at functioning nonprofits. I was technically a first-week resident of someone else's East Wing. I stayed after every session to ask the professor questions, not as a performance of diligence, because I had spent 6 years at Harlow and Reed, building work I believed in, and I had watched it disappear in 15 minutes in an HR conference room, and I was not interested in making that particular category of error again. Chloe called every few days. She always called in the evening, and always sounded warm, the specific warmth of someone who knew me before all of this, and was glad to still be present for it. She asked how I was settling in, what Eleanor was like in daily practice, what the board's decision-making structure looked like, what kinds of cases I was working on, whether I had met with outside counsel, yet about the asset transfer. I answered everything. I was grateful for the familiar voice, the continuity of it, and I did not examine the pattern of the questions closely enough to register what they were doing. Patricia left a second coffee on my desk one morning, without comment or explanation. I looked at it for a moment before understanding. It was intentional. She had already turned back to her own desk. By the time I looked up, I said nothing and she said nothing. But it happened the next morning and the one after that. And I noticed each time. Late in the first week of November, I fell asleep at my desk, with my face on a stack of grant review files. I learned this the following morning, only because when I woke up, stiff and disoriented, with the room dark outside the windows, there was a blanket over my shoulders. That had not been there when my eyes closed. Eleanor never mentioned it. I never brought it up. The 4th board meeting of October included the South Quarter domestic violence shelter application, occupancy metrics below the preferred threshold, outcome data incomplete due to a mid-year data management transition. 2 board members recommended deferral. The discussion moved in that direction, with the particular momentum of a room where people have already privately agreed. I put down my pen. I told them what Donna had told me on Clement Street. I told them that a 14-month placement wait list means 14 months, during which outcomes the data cannot capture may occur. I told them the data gap they were citing as cause for deferral, was a direct result of a software transition the shelter had undertaken, specifically to improve their reporting accuracy, which our own grant guidelines defined as evidence of organizational capacity, not risk. The room went quiet. The vote moved forward. In the corridor after Eleanor fell into step beside me. "That is the first time in 3 years," she said, "that anyone in that room said what needed to be said." Patricia passed in the other direction, with a stack of files, moving at her usual pace. Without slowing, without turning, she gave me one single nod. That evening Chloe called again. She asked how the board meeting had gone, what Eleanor had said afterward, whether I had a proper office yet. I answered everything and hung up. A minute later I picked the phone back up. I read back through 3 weeks of our conversations, the questions in sequence, the rhythm of what she asked and in what order. Something about tonight felt different. I could not name what I was noticing. I set the phone down face first on the desk, and did not pick it up again before bed. Before I show you what Naomi found, when she opened that laptop, I need to know you're still here with me. Drop the number 10 in the comments. Just that number. Nothing else. It tells me you're staying for what comes next. And trust me, you do not want to miss this. A quick note. Some elements in this story have been shaped for narrative and educational purposes. If this is not the kind of content you choose to watch, you are welcome to step away at any point. No hard feelings at all. It was a Friday afternoon in the middle of November, and I was on my 3rd cup of tea, and my 2nd revision of the East Side housing proposal, when my phone lit up with a message from Chloe. That was not meant for me. The text arrived mid-thought, the way misdirected messages always do. Abrupt and already past the point of being preventable. I read it twice before I moved. Has she mentioned the board transition timeline yet? B needs to know before end of week. No preamble, no context. The she was unidentified. B was unidentified. And the question had nothing to do with anything Chloe and I had ever discussed. I sat down my pen, I typed back Chloe. This came to me. I watched the message deliver. 1 checkmark, then 2. Then the indicators showing it had been read. Then nothing. I returned to the proposal and tried to keep working, which I managed for approximately 4 minutes, before I stopped pretending. 40 minutes later my phone rang. "Oh God, I am so sorry." Chloe's voice was light and immediately apologetic, in the practiced way of someone who has spent 40 minutes preparing. To be light and apologetic. That was meant for my colleague Bridget Crawford. We've been going back and forth all week about a grant timeline for a client, complete misdirect. I'm mortified. "Who is B?" I said. "Bridget. Bridget Crawford. I've called her B for years. It's just, you know how it is when you're texting on autopilot." She laughed, the small, self-deprecating sound she produced when she needed something to seem smaller than it was. "Work nonsense, I promise. How are you? How was the week?" "What board transition timeline?" I said. A pause, half a beat, not long enough to name the client's governance structure, she said. Her voice had recovered its warmth. "It's complicated to explain without context. Truly, Naomi, it's nothing client stuff." I said the week had been fine. I said I needed to get back to the proposal. I hung up. I sat for a long moment with the phone in my hand. Then I opened my laptop. 18 months ago, Chloe and I had worked together on a shared client project, a small account that required a joint Gmail address for coordinating with the client's team. The project wrapped, the account stayed open, and I still had the login credentials. In the Notes app on my phone, Patricia was at her desk near the office door, working through a stack of outgoing correspondence. I said nothing to her. I opened a browser tab and logged into the account myself, with my own credentials. The account had been in use. I scrolled back. The earliest messages in the thread were from April 7th, months ago, and 2 months before the LLC amendment execution date. I now knew by heart. Brandon had sent the first message. Chloe's reply was brief and careful, the voice of someone at the edge of a decision, still deciding. By May the messages were weekly. By June more frequent than that. Chloe's reports were precise, in the way that suggested she had been asked To be precise, my work schedule at Harlow and Reed, and how late I had been staying, my comments about money, as the joint account contributions tightened, the names of friends I had mentioned, drifting away from the moments I had described, feeling uncertain about what I was building. Brandon's replies were measured and directing, asking follow-up questions, steering her attention towards specific subjects, acknowledging her observations, with the flat efficiency of someone managing a source, rather than reading messages from a person. Then I found the email I had not expected. In a message from July, Chloe, I need confirmation the arrangement is still in place. My forbearance period ended last month. I'm behind on 3 payments now, and the servicer has started escalating. I cannot keep doing this without knowing. The transfers are consistent. Brandon's reply arrived within 40 minutes. It referenced a monthly payment, described as a consulting arrangement, confirmed the amount, and told her the next disbursement would process on August 1st. I read the exchange 3 times. The financial pressure in her message was visible, and entirely human. The particular desperation of a forbearance period, ending the gap between what she earned and what she owed, compressing into something unavoidable. I knew how student loan debt worked. I had watched it operate in the lives of people I cared about, and understanding the mechanism did not make the fact of it smaller. It made it more complete. Chloe had not stumbled into this. She had done it deliberately, weekly across 7 months for money she needed, knowing exactly who she was doing it to. The desperation was real. The choice was still hers. I closed the laptop. The office was quiet. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, Fairhaven moved through its Friday and flat November light, unhurried and indifferent to what had just happened. In this room I did not hear Eleanor come in. I became aware of her. The way you become aware of something that has been still long enough to become part of the space. She was in the chair across from my desk, hands in her lap, saying nothing. She had not been told anything. She had simply read the room, walked in and sat down. She waited. After a long time I said, "How do you trust anyone after this?" Eleanor looked at me steadily. "You don't trust the same way," she said. "What you had before was assumption. What you build after is evidence gathered more slowly, extended to fewer people, tested with more care. The capacity itself is not what broke. What broke was the part that did not require proof." She paused and her voice did not soften. "That is not a small loss. I will not tell you it is. But what remains is not nothing. What remains is better at its job than what you started with." It was not comforting. It was true those were not always the same thing. And I was grateful she had not tried to make them so. I drove back to the estate that evening in silence. On the highway I made one deliberate decision. I would not contact Chloe. Not tonight and not this week. I would let her believe the misdirected message had been satisfactorily explained, because what I had found in that account was serious, but something I could not yet name told me it was not the bottom of it. There was something underneath that I had not yet reached, and I needed to understand its shape before I did anything that would close off my ability to find it. The week after I discovered what Chloe had done, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I buried it completely, and I went back to work not because I had processed it, not because I had found a way to make it smaller than it was. I buried it because I had learned in the past 6 weeks that work done with full attention is the only thing that reliably takes up more space than grief. And I was not willing to give Chloe Marsh the square footage. 3 and 2 months. From the outside it is a number, a span of period that can be summarized easily. From the inside it was the fullest I had ever lived. 12-hour days, field visits 3 times a week, evening program 3 nights. I rewrote the foundation's entire grant application process from the initial intake form through the final disbursement review, shorter language, cleaner criteria, and a mandatory 30-day site visit built into every approval regardless of grant size. Eleanor reviewed the revised framework in one sitting and signed off without changes. Patricia printed it, filed it in the operational binder on the left side of her desk, and said nothing. I had come to understand that the binder on the left was her highest form of endorsement. The East Fairhaven Teen Center was on a block I had driven past without registering what it was. One Thursday evening in December, I sat across from a 17-year-old named Keisha, who explained, in the measured way of someone who has explained this more times than she should have had to, why she could not go home. I stopped trying to make my parents understand what it's like. She said it just takes too long and it hurts too much. And I have a test on Friday. I looked at her for a moment. Friday is 3 days away. I said that's enough time to get through tonight. First she thought about that. Then she nodded. I stayed until midnight. We talked about the test, about a teacher she liked, about what she wanted to study if she got to choose. When I finally left, Patricia was in the parking lot, with the engine running, and 2 gas station coffees, one of which she handed through the window. Without a word, she had been there for 2 hours. I had not asked her to wait. You didn't have to stay, I said. I know Patricia said she put the car in drive. The evening program ran 3 nights a week, at the university satellite campus, through January and into February. Still the youngest in the room. Still, the one who stayed after class to ask the professor questions that ran 20 minutes past anyone else. I cried during the ethics module in January. Not dramatically, just the quiet kind that arrives when something you have been circling for weeks finally lands directly, and I did not feel the need to explain it to anyone. Patricia began sharing things about her own life. In the same way, the second coffee had started appearing on my desk, without announcement, in small amounts at unexpected moments. My daughter called last week. She said one afternoon in December, not looking up from what she was reading. Second year of nursing school. She said she finally understands why I do this work. What did you tell her? I asked. That it took me 12 years to understand it myself. She turned to Paige. She said that was not encouraging. I said it was the truth. One Tuesday evening in late January, I was watching local news on my phone before bed, a habit I had developed for tracking regional housing coverage. A 32-second segment covered the foundations, East Quarter transitional housing approval. The anchor used my name and my title. For approximately 3 seconds I was on the screen. I noted the coverage in my log and set the phone down. Across the city, a man named Gerald Gaines sat in his kitchen, watching the same segment on the small television above his counter. He was 71 years old, a retired civil engineer, who had lived next door to the Wells estate for 19 years. When he heard my name, he set his tea down very carefully. He reached for his phone. He held it for a long moment. Then he placed it back on the table. He was not yet certain. He needed to be certain before he did anything at all. In early February, I made my first fully autonomous grant decision, $47 million for the East Quarter Women's Transitional Housing Project. I lost 3 nights of sleep, going over the rationale from every angle I could reach. The East Quarter waitlist was running 18 months out. The numbers told one story. The families I had sat with told another. I trusted both. And I trusted what Donna had told me on Clement Street 3 months before I made the call. It was right late in the final week of February. I closed a policy document at 1:00 in the morning in the estate library. The fire had burned to coals. The lake outside was invisible in the dark. I sat in the silence, and somewhere in that silence, I registered something I had not been looking for. I had not thought about Brandon in 14 days. Not with grief. Not with the low-grade anger that had replaced grief. Sometime around November. Simply not at all. Like a tooth that had ached so long. It had become part of the background. And one morning the background had quietly changed. I sat with that for a while. I let it be what it was. The alarm was set for 4:45. I went to bed at 1:30. At 4:15 there was a knock at my door. Eleanor. A single thin folder held against her side. Her expression was the most unreadable I had ever seen it, which from her was significant. Come to the library when you're dressed, she said. For the first time in 5 months. My hands were not entirely steady. When I reached for the light, before I tell you what was inside that sealed envelope, the one a man had been quietly carrying for 5 months, waiting for exactly the right moment to place it in her hands, I need you to do one thing first. Type the word Raymond in the comments right now. If you believe, some people protect us in ways we never even know about. One thing worth mentioning, the story ahead contains fictional elements woven in for depth and meaning. If this is not the content you are looking for, you are completely free to stop the video here. I respect that choice entirely. I had never heard the name Gerald Gaines before. The morning he called the Foundation's main line and asked specifically to speak with me. The call came on a Monday. I had been in back-to-back program review sessions since 7:30 and was eating lunch at my desk when my assistant put the call through with a note. Older gentleman says it is personal, says you will know what it concerns when you hear it. I picked up. The voice on the line was slow and deliberate. The voice of someone who had learned at some point. That precision was worth the extra seconds it required. My name is Gerald Gaines, he said. I live next door to the Wells estate in Western Heights. For 19 years. I believe I have something that belongs to you. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Meridian building. The following morning, Gaines was 71 with the broad, careful hands of a man who had spent his career in materials and load-bearing structures. He had been a civil engineer for 37 years. He ordered black coffee, wrapped both hands around the mug, and did not begin speaking immediately, which I already understood. Within the first 2 minutes, was simply how he operated. He had known Raymond Wells for 19 years, the natural product of adjacent properties, and 2 men who kept early hours. For 12 of those years, they had coffee together on Saturday mornings, alternating kitchens. Raymond was not a complicated man, Gaines said. He knew what he believed, and he kept it mostly to himself. But he talked about you. He looked at the table then back at me, more than he talked about most things. 3 months before Raymond died, he had come to Gaines with a sealed envelope and a single instruction. Find Naomi when she is standing on her own. Not before he told Gaines. He had strong reason to believe his son would take steps to prevent Naomi from receiving what was rightfully hers, and that he could not stop it without destroying what remained of his family. In the time he had left, he didn't give me the particulars. Gaines said he needed someone outside the family to hold this until the right time. He said I would recognize the right time when I saw it. He had watched local news carefully for months. 2 weeks ago, he had seen my face and my name on a 30-second segment about the East Quarter housing approval. He had picked up his phone. He had set it back down. The following morning he had called. I needed to be certain first, he said. He reached into his jacket and placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. I recognized the handwriting on the front as Raymond's. Deliberate, slightly slanted. The same hand that had signed birthday cards for 5 years. That I now read with different eyes. Before I opened it, Gaines explained what it contained and what accompanied it. At David Haverford's office, Raymond had established a revocable living trust 18 months before his death, a legal arrangement in which assets are held by a designated trustee for a named beneficiary, entirely separate from the estate, not subject to probate. The trustee was his personal attorney David Haverford. The trust held $32 million in separately managed investment accounts. The sole named beneficiary was me. Irrevocable living trust does not pass through probate and is not part of the publicly filed estate record. Brandon, as a beneficiary of Raymond's primary estate, had no legal access to this trust and no standing to modify it. What Brandon had done, Gaines explained carefully, was intercept the notification letter that Haverford's office had sent to Naomi's last known address, the Wells estate, following Raymond's death. The letter had never reached her. Haverford had assumed it had been received. The trust had remained in administrative hold, awaiting contact from the beneficiary for 5 months. Every dollar of it was intact. David Haverford has every document, Gaines said. The trust is whole. Nothing was lost. It was only kept from you. I opened the envelope. Raymond's handwriting ran 3 pages. Deliberate, slightly slanted, plain. In the way of someone who had decided that clarity was more respectful than eloquence. He wrote that he had seen in me the character his son had been given every possible advantage to develop, and had chosen not to. He wrote that he had known for some time what Brandon was capable of, and had made a calculation in his final months about how much damage he could prevent versus how much he would cause by acting openly. He did not apologize for having loved his son. He apologized for having loved him in a way that did not require his son. To be honest, he asked me to forgive the inadequacy of what he had managed. He asked me to use the trust for people who needed it more than the Wells family did. He asked me if I had the chance to remember that not everyone in that house had been indifferent to what was happening. I read it twice. I placed it face down on the table. I looked out through the fogged window at the March Street for a long time without speaking. He talked about you often. Gaines said he was proud of you. He wanted you to know that. However it came to reaching you. I looked at him across the table. Did he know before he died? Did he know exactly what Brandon was going to do? Gaines wrapped both hands around his mug again. He held it. The pause was not evasive. It was the kind that belongs to someone selecting the most accurate words from among several available. He always knew, he said. The lunch crowd on the sidewalk outside the Meridian building was moving in both directions when I came out, and I stopped in the middle of it without planning to. People went around me, the way water goes around a stone that appears without warning in a current. Raymond had known. He had built a way out for me before I had any reason to need one. He had trusted me to find my own way, to the point where someone could find me. He had arranged for a door to exist before he knew whether I would ever need to walk through it. I stood there until the flow thinned enough that standing still no longer required active management. In the elevator up to the 24th floor, I did the arithmetic quietly. David Haverford held every document Brandon had intercepted, a legal notification letter with the deliberate intent of preventing a trust beneficiary from claiming assets she was legally entitled to. That was not a civil matter. Intercepting correspondence and concealing assets from a named beneficiary crossed into criminal fraud, the kind that the Foundation's outside counsel and eventually others would want to know about. I walked into Patricia's office and set the envelope on her desk. She read the first paragraph. She picked up the phone without looking up from the page. She said, I'll call David." The call from David Haverford came at 9:15, while I was still at my desk, reviewing the morning's site visit notes. He was brief, in the way of attorneys who bill by the hour, and have learned that clients appreciate efficiency over ceremony. The living trust was fully intact and documented. The intercepted notification letter had been logged as material evidence and photographed in the condition it was recovered. The divorce petition, filed in January, was moving through the courts on a standard timeline, without unusual complication. Brandon's attorneys had been served and had entered a formal response. One more thing, Haverford said. The interception of the notification letter meets the evidentiary threshold for a criminal fraud referral. We're building that file now. I'll have a full update to you before end of month. I thanked him and set the phone down. I gave myself approximately 60 seconds. Then I picked up my bag and walked to the library. Eleanor was standing when I arrived. The room smelled like old paper and cedar, and the particular stillness that certain spaces hold when something is about to happen in them, and the space already knows it. A single folder lay on the long mahogany table, not the thick leather binder Patricia had handed me on my first night here, but something lean and deliberate, everything extraneous removed. 2 chairs faced each other across the table. Eleanor had not sat. Before I ask you to sit down, she said, I want to tell you what I have actually observed. Not on the church step. What came after that? She remained standing. She spoke without notes. In the specific and sequential way. She did everything. The domestic violence shelter grant. The board had effectively decided before you spoke. You had been in that room for 3 weeks. And you opened the file anyway. And said what needed to be said. Not because it was expected of you. But because Donna had told you something. On Clement Street. That the metrics couldn't capture. She paused. Keisha, you stayed until midnight on a Thursday evening. With a 17-year-old girl you had met once. While Patricia waited in the parking lot in the dark. Without being asked. And without complaint. The grant application rewrite. There was a clause in the transitional housing eligibility language that would have disqualified a specific group of young applicants from a program designed to protect them. You found it on your own time, rewrote it on your own time, and filed the revision without mentioning it to anyone. She looked at me steadily. And the East Quarter decision, $47 million, made alone, without anyone to carry half the weight of it. Her voice held through all of it. Then for exactly one sentence it did not. You made it correctly. She sat down across from me and slid the folder forward. I opened it. President and Chief Executive Officer. Vos Family Foundation. Base salary $210,000 per year. A performance-based compensation supplement. Tied to endowment growth. Structured as a deferred benefit accruing from year 3. Subject to board approval and IRS compliance review. Full programmatic authority from year 3. Subject to board oversight and standard fiduciary duty. I read every page. I asked 3 questions. How the board reporting structure would function during the leadership transition. What the conflict of interest protocol covered for personal asset management. And what the succession provision looked like. In the first 12 months. Eleanor answered each one directly and completely. I picked up the pen. I signed. Patricia was already at the credenza. By the time I set the pen down, she produced a bottle of Meridian Reserve. A 2019 vintage that she had, I would later discover, placed there at the beginning of March. Nearly 4 weeks before today. When I eventually asked her about it, she said it had been an entirely spontaneous decision. The statement was not credible. And she knew that. I knew it, and neither of us felt the need to resolve this particular question. She poured 2 glasses and set them on the table. Then she sat across from me and looked at me, in the way she had when she had something to say, and had decided to say it. I have worked for Eleanor for 16 years, Patricia said. I have watched her do this walk every year. In the worst storm of the season. And I have seen her come home before sunrise on 14 of those years with nothing to show for it. She lifted her glass. I am glad it was you. I looked at her across the table. So am I said. I looked down at my own signature. On the last page of the contract. Slightly slanted to the right. The way my handwriting went. When I was paying full attention to something. 5 months ago tonight. I had been on a stone step in a storm. With 11% battery. A wet bag and no plan past the next 20 minutes. I did not say this aloud. There was no one in the room who needed me to. That evening I stood on the East Wing terrace. As the last of the March light left the surface of the lake. The air was cold and the garden below was still dormant. I stood in it and felt something I did not recognize. At first, a quality of the moment. I had to be still for several minutes. To correctly name. It was the absence of waiting. For 5 years, I had been waiting for something to finally be enough. For Brandon to see me, for my career to justify itself. For some version of my life to arrive. At wherever I was supposed to be going. Tonight I was not waiting for anything. What I did not know was that something I had set in motion today was already moving toward a person who had spent the last several months hoping it would never arrive. The call came on a Monday morning in April, and it was Patricia, and she was using the particular flat tone she reserved for information she found professionally satisfying, but considered it beneath her professional standards. To show she was in my doorway at 7:30, before I had finished the first review of the morning site visit files. She closed the door behind her, with the deliberate click of someone who had decided this conversation required walls, and placed a printed news alert face up on the corner of my desk. Sasha Reeves, associate attorney at Callaway and Briggs, was under preliminary FBI inquiry for multi-client financial fraud. A limited liability company, named in the supporting documents, bore formation details, and a registered agent address consistent with the LLC, into which Brandon had transferred the marital assets the previous October. I read the alert twice. I set it down on my desk without comment. Here is what David Haverford's team has assembled, Patricia said, sitting across from me and opening a slim folder. They have been working this in parallel with the trust recovery case for the past 3 weeks, beginning approximately 6 weeks after the asset transfer was finalized, so late July of last year. Money began moving out of the LLC through a series of investment authorization instruments, high-yield structures with non-standard redemption terms, arrangements that looked legitimate to someone reading a one-page summary, and did not look legitimate to anyone who read past it. How much, I said. Estimated exposure is approximately 6 million of the 85, Patricia said. The remainder is locked in the real estate holdings, which will take considerably longer to access through proper liquidation channels. She paused. Brandon signed every authorization document. He signed them the way someone signs when they trust the person handing them the paperwork, and do not feel the need to look at what they are actually authorizing. She set her pen down. Haverford noted the parallel without being asked. She did not say anything further about the symmetry of it. She did not need to. I had already seen it clearly enough from where I was sitting. The FBI investigation, I said. Where does it stand? Preliminary inquiry, Patricia said with precision. The file has been opened, and agents have begun gathering records. No charges have been filed, and no formal subjects have been designated. At this stage, these proceedings take months to build, sometimes considerably longer. Haverford wants you to understand that whatever happens on that track has no bearing on the trust recovery case. They are separate proceedings, on entirely separate legal grounds. The last piece. Sasha Reeves's apartment in the Callaway building had been vacated 9 days before the inquiry became public. Her phone had gone to voicemail and not come back. Her last confirmed location was not in any system anyone had yet found. I sat with all of it for a long time. After Patricia finished, outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, Fairhaven moved through its ordinary Monday. The construction crane on the hotel development, 3 blocks north, commuter traffic on the overpass, the particular quality of April light that suggests warmth without quite delivering it. Eleanor came in without knocking, which she had earned. She read the room the way she read most things, quickly, accurately, without requiring explanation. She went to the credenza, poured 2 glasses of water from the carafe, set one in front of me and sat down. I looked at the glass. Then I looked at her. Has the East Side Transitional Housing Project confirmed its October move-in schedule? I said. Eleanor considered me for a moment. First week of October, she said. Donna's family is on the confirmed list. I nodded. I picked up the water. I drank it, then I stood and walked to the window. The city arranged itself across the April morning, without reference to any particular story happening inside this building, on this floor, somewhere, in a significantly smaller apartment than the house, in Western Heights. A man I had been married to for 5 years was reading the same news alert that was sitting on my desk. He had replaced me with someone he trusted, completely and without reservation. That person had spent the better part of a year systematically moving his money into vehicles she controlled, and had left before he understood what had happened. I did not feel satisfaction at this. I genuinely looked for it and it was not there. What was there was something quieter, and considerably more durable. A recognition, clear and without heat, that the choices we make about who to trust are always, eventually and without exception, our own consequences to carry, not a punishment from outside, simply the shape of how decisions work when they have had enough time to finish themselves. I stood at the window until that thought had completed itself. Then I went back to my desk. and picked up the morning's work where I had left it. 3 days later, Patricia knocked once and set a message slip on the corner of my desk. Without commentary, Gloria Wells had called the foundation's main line. That morning she had left a callback number and indicated the matter was urgent. Patricia made no observation about this. She squared the slip with the edge of the desk, the way she aligned everything, and pulled the door closed. I looked at the number. I thought about what it meant, that she had called this office, this number, what she must know by now, and what she might not yet know, and what it had cost her to make this particular call. I sat with those calculations for several minutes. Then I made my decision about what to do with it, and I placed the slip in the center drawer, and I went back to the east side. Move in logistics I had been reviewing before Patricia had knocked that morning. I did not call Gloria back that afternoon. I put the message slip in the center drawer and returned to the east side. Move-in coordination notes. 4 days later, Gloria made her own decision about how to get my attention. The video went up on a Monday evening. Patricia sent me a link at 7:17 with a single line of subject text, flagging for awareness. Gloria had done this carefully, or as carefully as this kind of thing can be done. Soft ring lighting, a muted cardigan in dusty rose, that communicated humility rather than wealth. She sat slightly forward in the chair, which created the impression of confiding, rather than performing. Her voice carried the precise tremor of someone gathering composure after a great deal of pain. And she used 12 minutes of it to describe me as a cold and ungrateful woman who had abandoned a grieving family at its lowest point, someone who had chosen ambition over loyalty, and a paycheck over the people who had welcomed her into their home and asked for nothing in return. 580,000 views in 7 hours. For the first 5, the comments ran heavily in her favor. I read approximately 40 of them, and then I set my phone on the kitchen counter of the estate and went to bed. I did not post anything. I did not issue a statement. I did not contact a journalist, a publicist, or any person who might professionally benefit from knowing what I knew. I went to sleep. At 11:17 the following morning, PRA posted a 47-second clip to her account, with no caption. It was from Gloria's October live stream, The Storm Night, the Marble Foyer. The moment Gloria narrated my departure from her house, with the audible warm satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for exactly this, and found the reality of it pleasing. Priya had kept it in her camera roll for 6 months. She had kept it because something told her she should. Within 3 hours, the October clip had more combined views than Gloria's Monday video. A former neighbor from Western Heights, a woman whose name I did not know until that day, published her own written account independently. She named specific incidents, cited dates, and wrote without apparent agenda or prior coordination, which gave it the particular credibility that arranged things rarely have. She had been watching for a while. She had simply chosen this moment to say what she had seen. That same week, David Haverford's team filed civil documents as part of the ongoing will fraud proceedings, a scheduled action calendared weeks in advance, with no knowledge of Gloria's video and no coordination with anyone at the foundation. But court filings are public record, and 3 local journalists found them independently. Within 48 hours of the filing date, 2 of them ran the connection in their coverage. By Thursday evening, the original video had been age-restricted by the platform's standard content review process. By Friday afternoon, 2 regional news outlets had published corrections to stories that had initially presented Gloria's account without context. Her follow account, Patricia noted without being asked, had declined by close to a third in 4 days, and was still falling. That Thursday evening, I came in from the estate terrace to find Patricia and Eleanor in the main sitting room, a laptop open between them on the low table. Eleanor looked up and lifted her glass toward me, in a gesture that required no accompanying words. Patricia lifted hers down. Another 11,000 in the last 2 hours. Patricia said, "It's still moving." Eleanor looked at the laptop screen. Leave it, she said. And Patricia closed it. At 10:45 my phone rang. The name on the screen was PIA. The call was brief and warm, in the way the best conversations are, when you have not spoken to someone in months. No explanation of the gap required. The thread picked up exactly where it had been set down. I kept the clip because something told me to. She said I didn't know what for. I just knew I shouldn't delete it. I'm glad you trusted that, I said. A small pause, comfortable rather than empty. Are you okay, she said. Better than I've been in a long time, I said. And I meant it entirely and without qualification. We made a plan to have coffee the following week. Neither of us said anything more about Gloria, or the video or the October night the clip came from. There was nothing useful left to say about it. That the clip itself had not already said. More efficiently. Monday arrived grey and cool. The Fairhaven skyline pale in early morning light. Through the office windows. I was working through a grant review. Before the 9 o'clock staff call. When the desk phone rang. Building security from the lobby below. Ms. Caldwell. I have a Brandon Wells and a Gloria Wells here. Asking to come up. No appointment. They're describing the matter as urgent. I looked at the Fairhaven skyline. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass. For exactly 3 seconds. Bring them to the conference room on 22, I said. Tell them I'll be there shortly. Patricia had appeared in the office doorway. Which meant she had heard the call. Which meant she had already been in the corridor. When it came through. Which meant she had anticipated this. She set a slim folder on the corner of my desk. With the care and deliberateness she brought to everything she handled. And then she stepped back without speaking. I picked up the folder. I took one breath, slow and complete. Then I walked out of the office. They walked in. With the faces of people. Who had rehearsed what they were going to say. In the elevator. On the way up. And I could tell from the first step through the door. That whatever they had rehearsed would not be enough. Brandon entered first. The suit was the charcoal grey. I had seen at firm events. But it did not fit. The way it had fitted 6 months ago. The jacket was loose across the shoulders. In the particular way that happens when a body carries less of itself than it recently did. His face had aged. In a manner that did not distribute itself evenly. More around the eyes and jaw. The way stress concentrates. Gloria followed him in. Wearing a dress. I recognized from a dinner in September. Recognizable. Because she had mentioned the hem alteration. Twice that evening. As something to be proud of. She was wearing less jewelry than I had seen her wear in 5 years. I understood immediately that she was wearing what she still had. I had left the conference room table empty. No water, no coffee, no pens, no notepad. Patricia stood, visible through the glass wall of the corridor, positioned with the stillness of someone who had chosen her location, with deliberate care and intended to remain in it. Brandon began with an acknowledgement. Measured, specific, in places framed with precision. He said he had made decisions that were wrong. He said there were things he had not done, that he should have done, and things he had done that he should not have. He did not use the word apology, but the architecture of what he said reached toward it. Gloria followed with calibrated warmth. Grief in the voice. A carefully positioned hand on the table. Both of them were performing. Both of them were also in the unmistakable way of people who have genuinely run out of alternatives, feeling something real beneath the performance. I registered the distinction, and it did not change anything. We need to explain where things stand. Brandon said financially. I waited. What happened with Sasha has left us with approximately $2 million of what was originally transferred. The rest is locked in real estate positions. That will require time and legal process to liquidate. The mortgage on the Western Heights property is past due by 2 payments. He set his hands flat on the table, palms down. We are asking for bridge funding of $25 million. Enough to stabilize while the asset recovery proceeds. He framed it as a family matter. First, the weight of shared history. The complexity of what had happened between all of us. When nothing in my expression shifted, he reframed it as a structured loan arrangement. With terms and a proposed repayment timeline. He had apparently written out somewhere. When that produced no response either. He brought it down to the simplest thing he could. one person in a position to help, and two people who needed it. I opened the folder. I placed 3 business cards on the table, one at a time evenly spaced, and slid them across. A certified financial planner, who specializes in bankruptcy recovery and post-fraud asset reconstruction, I said. A free 8-week debt management program, co-sponsored by the foundation, offered at East Fairhaven Community Center on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and the foundation's community resource line, which connects individuals with legal aid referrals, mental health support, and transitional housing guidance. I looked at both of them. These are what the foundation makes available to anyone who walks through our doors, needing help. Exactly these resources, nothing more, nothing less. You would be treated precisely like anyone else who contacts us. Gloria's composure left before Brandon's. It did not leave loudly. It left in the specific deflating way of composure that has been maintained, on the assumption that the conversation will eventually go differently, and then does not. After everything this family did for you, she said. 5 years, everything we welcomed you into. I let it run to where it ended on its own. There was nothing useful to add to it. And anything I said would only have given it somewhere to redirect itself. Brandon had been waiting. I could tell. For the moment he considered his strongest position. He leaned forward slightly when he reached it. You have everything now, he said. We have nothing. Is that what you wanted when you walked out that door? I looked at him for a moment without moving. So did you, I said. He understood exactly what I meant. I watched him understand it. The recognition crossing his face, and settling into something I did not have a name for, and did not need one. He sat with it for a moment. Then he stood and Gloria stood with him. I held the conference room door open. Neither of them picked up the business cards from the table. I watched them cross to the elevator bay. The doors opened, they stepped, and the doors closed. The floor indicator climbed down to the lobby. I stood at the conference room window for a long time. After that, the Fairhaven skyline held its usual Monday morning shape. The construction crane 3 blocks north. The commuter traffic moving steadily across the overpass. April light on. The glass towers of the financial district. The city was doing what it always did. And it had no particular position on what had just happened in this room. And there was something in that indifference that I found at this moment almost restful. I heard the click of ceramic on the conference table before I heard Patricia's footstep. 2 cups from the 3rd floor cart. Not the office machine. The kind with actual weight to it. She set one within reach of my hand and stood beside me at the window. We stood in silence and looked at the city together. For a while there was nothing to say that the last 7 months had not already said more completely than words could. 3 weeks later, Patricia set a single sheet of paper on my desk. Without commentary, a notice from the Fairhaven County Property Records Office, the Wells Estate at Western Heights. The house, where a door had closed behind me in the rain 7 months ago, where a security alarm had chirped twice into the dark, had been scheduled for foreclosure auction. I read the document once straight through. I folded it along its original crease. I placed it in the center drawer of my desk, in the same drawer where I kept Raymond's letter. Then I closed the drawer and I went back to work. May came in warm and unremarkable, and I learned that justice, when it finally settles, does not announce itself. It arrives the way a house sinks into its foundation, gradually, then completely, then without the sound you had been expecting to hear. The Western Heights estate went to foreclosure auction on June. I know this because Patricia placed the auction summary on my desk as a matter of record, the same way she placed anything factual that was relevant to ongoing proceedings. The summary was 2 pages. No qualified bidders had presented at the auction. The property reverted to the bank under the existing mortgage terms, and the prior owners had 30 days to vacate. Brandon, Gloria, and Chloe Marsh moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the North Fairhaven district. Sometime in the 2 weeks that followed, Averford's team confirmed the address. As part of the civil service documentation, I read the confirmation and filed it. June brought 2 significant legal developments. arriving in the same week. With the particular compression of events that had been building for months, the first David Haverford confirmed that the FBI had formally escalated from preliminary inquiry to a full criminal investigation wire fraud and securities fraud, which meant the agency had gathered sufficient evidence to proceed with the weight of a full investigative apparatus. Brandon, who had until that point been categorized as a potential witness, was now designated a named subject of the investigation. The authorization documents he had signed, which Sasha Reeves had used as the mechanism for the transfers, established a level of participation that Haverford described as difficult to argue around at this stage. The formal subject designation triggered grand jury subpoenas from the U.S. Attorney's Office, compelling documents and testimony across all parties connected to the investment vehicles. Brandon's position, which had already narrowed considerably since October, became narrower still. The second Haverford confirmed that the Raymond Wells Living Trust matter had reached a full and favorable resolution. The $32 million was released from administrative hold and transferred into an account in my name, per Raymond's instructions, and per the decision I had already made. In the weeks following my meeting with Gerald Gaines, the funds would go to the New Ground Transitional Housing Endowment, enough to cover full operational costs for the first 6 years of the building's life. I filed the designation paperwork on a Thursday afternoon and did not think about the amount again. My first complete site visit to New Ground happened in the third week of June. For months of construction had produced something recognizable. The east courtyard had been framed and fully enclosed, the structural skeleton visible inside, its concrete and steel, the exterior cladding on the south and west faces, already weatherproofing against the summer. The children's outdoor area was still marked stakes and turned earth. The landscaping contract ran in August. I stood in the middle of what the courtyard would become, and I looked at the framed windows, and the future paths, and the staked positions of trees that were not yet there, and I was quiet for longer than I had planned to be. There was nothing useful to say about what I was standing inside of. I simply stood in it and let that be sufficient. I went back to the office and approved the landscaping contract. Security called from the lobby. On a Tuesday morning in early July, Brandon Wells, Gloria Wells and Chloe Marsh, all three together downstairs asking to come up. Send them to 22, I said. I'll be there. The three of them, arranged on the same side of the conference table, had the particular quality of a group that had formed under conditions none of them would have chosen. Brandon closest to the door, Gloria in the center, Chloe at the far end. They looked, I thought, like people who had been living with consequences long enough for the consequences to start showing in their faces. Chloe spoke first. She was thinner than she had been, and the specific quality that had made her easy to trust, that instinctive generating warmth, was simply absent, not performed away, depleted. I don't have anything to offer you, she said, except that what I did was wrong, and I knew that it was wrong when I was doing it. She stopped there. She did not ask for anything. She did not frame the statement as the opening of a longer conversation. She said the true thing and let it be the whole of what she had brought. I looked at her for a moment. I know, I said. Gloria said very little. The architecture of her presence, the layers of warmth and implication, and calibrated timing, was entirely gone. She was a woman in her late 60s who was tired, who had run through what she had, and who did not appear to have replenished it. I had no particular response to this. That required expression. Near the end of the meeting, Brandon looked up from the table. Raymond told me more than once that you were going to be fine. His voice carried no challenge in it. He said it the way someone says something they have been holding for a long time, without knowing where to put it. He said it like it meant something he thought I should be paying attention to. A pause. I wasn't. I let that sit where he had placed it. Then I set 3 business cards on the table. The same 3 programs, contact information updated for the current cycle, and slid them across. I stood up. I walked them to the elevator myself. I pressed the button. The four of us stood in the corridor in silence. Until the elevator arrived. They got in. I held the position at the door, neither moving toward it nor away, simply present and still, and giving them the ordinary courtesy of someone who has finished the conversation and is now waiting for the mechanism to complete itself. The doors closed. I stood in the corridor alone, in the quiet that followed, which was a specific kind of quiet, not empty but concluded. Then I heard Patricia's footsteps from around the far corner, steady and unhurried. She did not stop, did not alter her pace, did not look directly at me. As she passed, she raised 2 fingers at her side, a gesture that had developed between us, without planning, and which meant without further elaboration done. 6 weeks later, in the last of the August evening light, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the new ground building, and looked out at East Fairhaven. The construction was complete. The courtyard plantings had gone in, small trees still staked, window boxes at every ground floor unit. The first confirmed move-in date was October, 1 year to the week from the night storm. Lara had moved through this city, and I had walked out of a house in the rain, with a bag and no destination. Eleanor came to stand beside me. She looked at the skyline for a moment before she spoke. "Are you ready?" she said. I thought about it honestly, the way she had always required of me. I thought about Donna and Keisha, and the 47 families whose names I now knew, without checking a list. I thought about Raymond's letter in the center drawer, and the 3 words Gerald Gaines had said, "Overcooling coffee." "In March, yes," I said. "I think I have been for a while." Eleanor nodded once. She did not add anything because nothing needed adding. Below us at the service entrance, on the east side of the building, a delivery truck's engine rumbled. As it turned over, 2 figures in work clothes were pulling a loading ramp into position. At the back of it, someone was unloading beds. The morning of September, I woke before the alarm. For the first time since October of the previous year, I lay in the dark of the East Wing for a few minutes, and thought about a stone step in a storm, a woman with bare feet and silver hair, and a raincoat I had not thought about, missing once, in the 11 months since I had given it away. Then I got up and put on the charcoal grey suit. Patricia had the logistics running. Before I reached the ground floor, on the morning of the event itself, she moved through the estate, with the quiet velocity of someone whose preparation had been thorough enough that execution required almost no visible effort. She handed me a coffee without being asked. "Governor confirmed at 8:45. She said the sound system tested at 7. "You're third on the program." "Thank you, Patricia." I said she was already somewhere else. The new ground plaza held 3,500 people. By the time the program began, Eleanor was in the front row in a winter white blazer, hands folded in her lap, holding the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a specific thing to happen, and is now watching it happen, and finding it exactly sufficient. She caught my eye from the stage. Before the governor began, she did not nod. Neither did I. We had been past the need for that for some time. The governor spoke for 14 minutes. Warm, specific. The foundation's name used correctly throughout. When he finished, he turned toward the podium and said my name. I walked up. I started with October 14th. I did not name anyone. I described only the shape of it. A door closing behind you in the rain. A walk through a city that continues, without reference to you. A stone step under an overhang that keeps the rain off. I described the moment of understanding that the people who should form your foundation can sometimes be the reason you realize you need to build one for yourself. What I learned that night, I said, is that family is a choice made repeatedly, in ordinary moments and impossible ones, that the strangers who reach toward you, when you have nothing left to give them, are more family than any name on a legal document, and that what we build for each other, especially when we have no obligation to build it, is the only architecture that actually holds. I turned toward the building. 240 units of permanent transitional housing. An on-site clinic open 6 days a week. Job training certification programs, with 4 regional employer partners. Licensed childcare on the 2nd floor. a rooftop garden, with individual plots available to every resident, and one foundational policy written into every layer of the intake process. No one turned away for lack of documentation. Near the back of the crowd, half-shadowed under the old oak, at the edge of the east courtyard, I saw them without looking for them. Brandon in a coat that no longer fit properly at the shoulders. Gloria, with both hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup, holding it, the way people hold things when they are cold, and have run out of other things to hold onto. Chloe half a step behind, smaller looking than I had ever seen her. In all the years I had known her. My voice did not change. I finished the sentence I was in. I finished the paragraph after it. The governor came forward and cut the ribbon. The crowd stood. Children, who had been held at the edges of the gathering, surged toward the plaza, pulling flowers from the courtyard planters, running in the way children run when they have been asked to wait a long time. And the waiting is finally completely over. I stepped down from the podium and moved through the dispersing crowd toward the building entrance. The space between the stage and the doors was perhaps 40 meters, and it took a while. Brandon stepped forward from the oak's shadow. As I passed, he said my name once, in the tone of someone who had prepared a sentence and was discovering, in the moment, that the sentence had not survived contact with the actual day. I continued walking. Not quickly, not slowly. At the pace I had been moving. Gloria extended a hand. As I came parallel to where she stood, there was nothing in her expression I had not already seen in April. The same exhaustion. The same absence of remaining resources. Her hand did not reach anything. Chloe opened her mouth. I watched her do it. Then she closed it. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she had nothing to say. Whatever she had come here expecting to find in herself, it was not available to her today. The entrance doors of New Ground slid open automatically. As I approached, warm air moved out across the threshold. New paint, cedar from the staircase paneling, and something from the kitchen, at the end of the main corridor, that had been cooking since early morning. I stepped through. The door slid closed. Behind me the lobby was quiet after the plaza noise. September light came through. The south-facing glass panels without heat, and the wood along the staircase wall, absorbed it evenly. I stood for a moment and let the quiet settle around me. A small hand closed around my sleeve from below. A boy 7 years old, give or take, wearing a blue superhero shirt with a cape, that was doing its best in the still indoor air, looked up at me with eyes that were entirely serious. In his other hand, slightly bent from being carried through the ceremony, was a dandelion, from somewhere in the courtyard planting. He held it out. Are you the lady who built this place? I bent down to his level. I'm one of them, I said. He pushed the dandelion forward until I took it. Then he looked at me with the directness children use when they have decided something matters. Enough to say carefully, we have beds now, he said, a real bed. Just for me. I held the dandelion. Anne, for the first time since October of the previous year, I smiled the way you smile. When nothing inside you is working to produce it. When something simply arrives whole and unasked for. And your face does what it does in response. Just for me. 3 words from a 7-year-old boy in a blue cape. And they reached somewhere in my chest I had not known. Was still waiting to be reached. Outside the celebration continued. Inside. New ground in the quiet lobby that smelled like cedar. And new paint. And something warm from a kitchen down the hall. The future had already begun. And I was exactly where I belonged. If this story taught me one thing, it is that family betrayal, the quiet, calculated kind, rarely announces itself. It looks like love. It looks like trust. That is what family betrayal does. It works best in the light, where you are least likely to question it. I believe God placed Eleanor Voss on that church step, for a reason, not to rescue me from pain, but to show me what I was already capable of becoming. Don't be like me. Don't wait until a storm closes a door behind you to discover what you are made of. Know your value before someone else decides it for you. Here is my personal opinion. Family revenge is not something you pursue. It is what happens when people's own choices finally catch up to them. The truest family revenge is the life you build on the other side of family betrayal, quietly, steadily, without looking back. And every story of family revenge I have ever witnessed ends the same way. The people who chose badly are eventually the only ones left carrying it. The people who hurt me most were the ones I called family. The people who rebuilt me were strangers who chose to be. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. Share it with someone who is standing in their own storm tonight. And if you have not subscribed yet, this story is only the beginning. Thank you for staying with me until the very last word. It means everything. A note before we continue: some stories on this channel, fictional elements built purely for reflection and meaningful conversation. If this type of content is not right for you, we fully respect that. Please find what speaks to you best. That's the end of today's story. Thanks for your time. I'll see you again soon.